You're listening to Just Neighbors, where we are learning to practice biblical justice and compassion together. Hello, neighbors. I'm Jami Cabe, along with my good friend Ryan MacDonald, and we are so happy you are here with us. Welcome to the show. It is a beautiful day in the neighborhood. What do you think?
The Daniel
I
Tiger
felt good
reference?
about that line. Yeah,
Or
well, I
are we
would
going
call
all
it
the
more
way back
Mr.
to
Rogers.
Mr. Rogers? Yeah.
Mr. Rogers.
It
I
depends
felt
if you have
like it
little
felt...
kids or not, where the reference lands.
I don't know. I was particularly excited about that, and I was waiting to see your response.
Yeah, I'm
Anyway.
here for it. I can see the
Okay.
trolley in my head right now.
Yes, totally. And I'm
Pulling in
changing
front
my
of my
sweater
house.
right now. Okay. I'm feeling particularly excited about today's episode. So Ryan, why don't you tell us what we're in store for?
Yes. Yeah. We at Just Neighbors are really looking to practice biblical justice and compassion together. And that means that these are mandates and gifts and calls that God is bringing us into. And to do it alone is not only not a lot of fun, but a crushing weight. And so I'm just so excited to have Andy Crouch with us today to kind of help us talk about and navigate how we move towards human flourishing, particularly in communities where people are marginalized or oppressed, and what the call is to followers of Jesus to take on that mantle and to do it with joy. So Andy Crouch is a partner for theology and culture at Praxis, an organization that works creatively for redemptive entrepreneurship. I love that language. He also serves on governing boards for Fuller Theological Seminary, the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. His books include The Tech-Wise Family, Playing God, Culture Making, and most relevant for our conversation today, Strong and Weak. Tagline, Embracing a Life of Love, Risk, and True Flourishing. Andy, what a privilege to have you on.
Thank you very much. It is a privilege for me. I'm happy to be with you guys.
Good. Well, let's just start off by talking about this idea of human flourishing, something that you've written and talked a lot about. And why don't you just give us a little bit of your insight or your thoughts around what is this topic of human flourishing all about?
Wow. All right. We will dive right
Let's just go
into
right there.
the deep question. Did you want to ask me about my favorite baseball team or anything first? Or
We don't care about that.
Here we go. So, well, indeed, human flourishing. So, that way of putting the matter is it's a Greek idea. It goes back to the philosopher Aristotle, really, and he is thinking a lot about this, thousands of years ago. But I find it helpful to actually reframe it in the way that Jewish people would frame it, which is, what is the greatest commandment? Because I think that's actually the way you ask in a Jewish idiom, in a sense, the question of what's the highest goal for human beings. And, usefully for our purposes, or fortunately for us, this question was put to Jesus. And Jesus answers it in some ways exactly the way you would expect him to answer. It's actually maybe the only time Jesus answers a question with the expected answer, in that he says what every rabbi then and now would say, which is, it's called the Shema Yisrael for the first two Hebrew words. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one, the Lord is God alone. And then it says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Or at least that's how Jesus quotes it. He actually adds mind. It's like the best known line in the Hebrew Bible, and he adds a word, which is what you do, I guess, when you are Jesus, as opposed to everybody else. So heart, soul, mind, and strength. So I actually think this is an incredible picture of what it is to flourish, that we are meant to love. We're designed above all for love. And we're meant to love with all, and a kind of allness of heart, which I suppose we could say includes kind of emotion and will in the Hebrew understanding, like what you choose, what you go after, what you chase, that's all driven by your heart. Soul, which is depth of self and the capacity to deeply relate to yourself, to others, and ultimately to God. Mind, which is how you think through where you are in the world, conceptualize the world. And then strength, which is actually we're in bodies. We're embodied creatures. We're not brains on a stick, or emotion without reason, or reason without emotion. That we're actually embodied. And human flourishing would be, I think it's frankly a better answer than Aristotle. Well, I think it's, if Aristotle could have heard Jesus explain it, I think he would have thought, yes, this is what I was trying to get at. It's the ability, it would be the ability to fully love above all God, but also Jesus adds, that's the other innovation when Jesus answers the question. He says it's the greatest commandment has kind of two aspects: love God this way and love your neighbor. That would be human flourishing if we did that. So not an original answer, but interesting how much it opens up in a way for questions about, am I flourishing? Are my neighbors flourishing? What would it look like? It would look something like that.
So in your own life, in your own journey, to go back to a personal question, it's not about baseball, so I'm sorry if you're a big baseball fan.
No,
but
it's okay.
What's your journey been like in moving towards your ability to fully love? Because I think that's a beautiful framework. And I agree with you that it's very Jesus-y, what you're saying, in terms of his life and mission. We see a man throughout the Gospels who was fully able to love.
Right.
And you see him retreating to connect with the Father, to be filled and to pour out, and to be filled and to pour out. For you, in your own walk with the Lord, in your own ministry, as you've thought about this, what's it like for you as an individual, as a follower of Jesus, to move towards fully loving others?
I think what it has been, and I would say, I mean, I don't know how far along I am on this journey, 5% maybe. I don't feel like I'm not at the nearly finished stage. But as I've been on the journey, it is actually about unlearning a bunch of other false loves, I suppose.
That's really good.
And, I think about Paul, who says in Philippians, he lists all these things that he did indeed attach a great deal of importance to and identity to. And he says, I now count all these as rubbish. And I feel like in some ways, my life has been about the rubbishing of a bunch of things that I could have put a lot of, and did put a lot of weight on. The very first, this is just my own story. I think the first thing I found security in the awkward, painful years of like middle school or junior high that I was in, was this is kind of a weird thing to say, but it was being smart. I was good at school. Things came easily to me. And boy, did I get fixated on that as my refuge from pain. And when I had painful interactions with other kids, I mean, almost literally, I would say in my head, but I'm smarter than they are. Like, it was my refuge, which means it became my idol. And if you'd met me in those difficult years, you would have seen someone who was very conspicuously relying on being intelligent. And I've had to realize that's rubbish. Like, I mean, there's some gifts I have that I frankly did nothing to earn or achieve, that I can use, but compared to love, a total impediment to loving people. And then I would say maybe the next big thing, and this took even much more time because it was deeper, is in a way achievement itself, like the quest to achieve, the quest to impress, the quest to rank highly in some domain. And I think one of the tricky things, I've not achieved as much as some people do, but there are some games you're like, ooh, I think I'm in that game. You don't necessarily think you're not sure you can win, but you want to play. And the achievement game and being around a lot of high achievers, I had to, this ongoing thing, but I had to like rubbish that. And maybe a third thing that may be the longest thing, this may sound really weird to say, because I believe in the gospel and I believe in the faith we share. Like, I'm committed to this faith once for all delivered. But I've had to also rubbish my religiosity, my ability to perform well in the terms of religion and to be the older son who's always, in the Father's house serving, and not like that bad younger son who goes off and does all these things. And man, that older son identity with respect to God, with respect to church, is probably the thing I'm the longest wave of repentance in my life is to just not count that as anything. Those would be some of the false selves that have had to be like shed to be able to love truthfully.
I'm hearing like a dependence when what you're shedding is a dependence on self. And so in order to love other people, you've got to become dependent on God.
Right.
And even on others.
Right. That's right. Yeah. Yep.
No, I appreciate your vulnerability. And man, I just am resonating. I'm like, check, struggle with that. Check, struggle with that. It's interesting on the intellect side because I grew up on the opposite end of the spectrum where I was dyslexic. I had a processing disorder. I barely graduated high school. I think I had like a 2.1. I wanted nothing to do with school. When I walked my senior year, I had an 8th grade reading level. And so I had just kind of like thrown off school and it became this insecurity. So your dependence on your intellect was the thing that crippled me. And I walked away from the Lord for 3 years. And a part of it was so much shame from my inability to read. And the fact that evangelicalism, Protestantism, rightly so, is a religion of a book. It's a lot of reading. But the Lord started calling me back to himself, and I started reading the Bible, and literally my dyslexia started to heal as I read the Bible.
It's just the crazy
words
thing.
unscrambled in front of me, and God started meeting me in my moment of insecurity and giving me the ability to connect to him. And then I was like, I gotta go to school. I didn't have a college degree, so I went to Biola, studied biblical studies and theology. This last weekend, I graduated with my master's degree. And I got highest honors.
Right.
And it has nothing to do with me. Nothing. It's God.
Grace.
It's God taking those areas of vulnerability and shame and using them for his glory and to reveal his power. And I think that place of vulnerability, like that's where the work of justice comes from. Exactly what you set the tone for right now, Andy, is just like, hey, these are things that are self-dependent. And if I want to do the work of biblical justice and compassion, you cannot sustain in self-dependence. It has to be God-dependent. It's the only way it works.
Wow. That's amazing. It's so right. Yeah, anything that doesn't emerge from grace has a very short half-life and does a lot of damage. And even best intentioned stuff, especially best intentioned, right? Because that can camouflage for so much longer actual exploitation. So that's a beautiful story you've lived out. My goodness. And it's interesting how I think these things are, superficial opposites, in that I sort of was able early to access those abilities and took refuge in them. But actually the shame dynamic is exactly the same. In other words, even if you succeed on the terms of a kind of shame transaction, you're still bound by the shame. And it was absolutely out of shame that I took refuge in my, what I thought of as my intelligence. And that's what we have to be deeply, deeply set free of, because of course shame is very isolating. And the work of love is connecting, and you never connect if you are bound even by success on shame's terms. I mean, that's the tricky thing, is you can be doing really well, but you're doing well on shame's terms, and then you never actually connect.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, Andy, on shame's terms. That's so powerful.
I'm thinking about it's funny because I can't relate, Andy, to the feelings you had when you were growing up, because I was like, I like people. Like, I don't get school. Like, school's fine. Like, I'm going to do fine. But I always make the joke, I was the top 10 in my class, but also the bottom half, because there was only 18 of us.
Indeed. Congratulations.
That's right. Thank you. It's a big deal. It's a really big deal. but I didn't have that. In fact, I'm thinking about when I first started TFI and was starting to like recognize, okay, God's calling me to be a leader. And yet I thought maybe he made a mistake, because what I thought a leader was supposed to be was someone who was very direct and very confident and a man. And I was none of those things. And so
you could practice on two of the three, but
right. The other one was there's no hope. But I remember hearing Patrick Lencioni talking about organizational health and about developing people and about caring about people. And I was like, oh, I get people.
Yes.
Like a lot of things I don't get. I get people. And so maybe God has put me in this position. But I still feel like even then, it's what you guys are talking about with the shame and the guilt, it's still trying to be the leader. It's easy to still fall into like, I'm supposed to be the leader like that, or I'm supposed to know how to do this. Yes. And it's like the things that come naturally, those don't matter. Those are not important, and until the Lord just continues to go, no, that's how I made you. Yes. Lean into those things and let somebody else do the other things.
Yes. Amazing.
It's a hard lesson to learn though, isn't it?
Oh, man.
And we're just still trying to figure it out.
Yeah. Wow. And once you do start leaning on other people, it's very related to kind of your prime directive here, which is how do we do this together? Because that is the way that it happens in a healthy way. Yeah. It's not by anyone having to be omnicompetent and able to carry the whole thing. And the unhealthiest organizations are the ones that have someone who can sustain that illusion for too long in a way, and who doesn't get rid of that illusion early. So it's done through the mixture of gifts, through interdependence, which means having to build a lot of trust, and that doesn't happen overnight, but it leads to such lasting health in what we do.
Right. So much more enjoyable.
So that's what we're made for.
It with people.
Totally.
Andy, I'd love to go back to this framework of moving towards the ability to fully love, and kind of two-part questions. One, the problem. Do you, in society, what is keeping us from the ability to fully love? We see a lot of distraction. We see a lot of disconnection right now.
Right.
And you've written about that extensively, so beautifully. Where do you see us heading as a society away from our ability to fully love? And then what's the road ahead to connect with Christ and to learn how to fully love?
I think every culture that is every kind of accumulation of human beings making something of the world together, there's lots of different cultures, and every one is broken in some way and frustrates and prevents human flourishing. In saying, offering a kind of diagnosis of our own, I'm not implying that like there's some other way that would be better, or that this is uniquely bad even. It's just kind of our current pattern of distance and disobedience, you might say. But if I had to kind of single out one thing, it would be that, you and I, we're recording this in 2024. We're about 200 years roughly into a story of trying to gain total control over the world through science and then technology in such a way that we don't need love to get things done. And that is kind of incomprehensible to other eras. Even if you think about, this is sort of an era where we're sort of taught to not want to go back to, but like feudal, the feudal world, the world of lords and serfs, although there were people in between the lord and the serf. And we think, what an unjust, hierarchical world. And it had elements of that, but it also had elements of loyalty, because the way you got things done in the feudal world was to maintain very powerful relationships of mutual care and responsibility, yes, along a hierarchy with where some are pictured above others, but they're also pictured in really intimate relationship with each other. So and everyone has someone that they are responsible to care for and provide for, and that's conceived of as kind of down the hierarchy, but everyone also has someone to be loyal to. It's an extremely relational picture of reality. And the sort of dream of the modern world is, we don't need any of those relationships. Like, instead, we just have power, basically through money. And through money, we can buy the technology that will allow us to do what we want to do in the world without dependence. And this has so many different forms. And of course, we could talk people want to talk a lot these days about screens, and absolutely this is happening on screens. But, I would actually mention in the context of the United States, the construction of an entire built environment around the automobile. So the automobile is obviously super useful. I own one. I drive it. But compare it to what preceded it, which is riding a horse, either on horseback or in a carriage or whatever. And even just in horse transportation, you have to care for an animal. You have a relationship with an animal that requires a relationship. The horses are not interchangeable. Like, you learn what they need, you care for them, you pay attention to their needs. And then you're able to move through the world in a pretty vulnerable way also, because it's relatively slow. You're quite exposed to the elements. You're exposed to other people. Well, the automobile seems like such an improvement. Don't have to care for a horse. You've got 300 horsepower now. You can motor along really fast, and you're very quickly completely encased in this environment. And it's kind of one-to-one. I mean, occasionally you bring other people with you in the car, but honestly, most of the time when I'm on the highway or whatever, I look around and everybody's in a car by themselves. And it's not just while you're in the car. It's that then the distance the automobile can traverse means we can spread out. And rather than building, if you ever happen to have the chance to go to Europe and you're flying into a European city, look at the countryside and you'll see that all the houses are clustered together in a little town. And then there are fields at the edge of the town. This is just the way Europe developed, because they didn't have cars when it developed. And then you look at America, and all the houses are spread out. And by the way, in Europe, the richer you are, the closer to the center and the density you live. And in the United States, with a few exceptions, in places like New York City or whatever, the richer you are, the more you move to the edges and have lots of land and a huge house. And by the way, in that huge house, everybody has their own bedroom, because what's better for us than to each have a place we can go and be totally by ourselves, and ideally with a TV and a phone, right? So this all is downstream of the automobile. And it created, structurally, that you and I cannot help living in a world that is designed to be lonely. I mean, it has lots of nice things about it, I suppose, but it's not good for connection and love. And so we could trace so many other things, but over and over, the kind of way we've deployed technology is to say, how can I use this to not need other people or to have more control in my relationships when I do interact with other people? So just to pick one other example, Sherry Turkle, who's really an important student of our times, you could say. She's a psychologist who teaches at MIT, and she's studied how college students in particular use the digital world. And a number of years ago, she was looking at this question of, why do youth and young adults prefer to text rather than talk? You have friends, maybe even a romantic interest. Why would you text them if you could call them or perhaps go see them? And the answer is, when she brings people into her lab and probes this, it comes down to a simple answer, which is people say, I can control what I say when I text. That is, when I text you, I can read over my message before I send it. I can limit what I communicate. When you and I are together in person, we're sending and receiving all kinds of messages we're not fully in control of, but when I text you, I'm in control. Well, that sounds very appealing until you realize that is the opposite of a relationship of trust, where I can trust you with the times I mess up and what I say, or that expression that you notice that I didn't even mean to let you see, and you ask me about it, or you're hurt by it, or you laugh at it, But if you take all that away, you may still have a friend group and a text group but you do not have kind of depth of relationship. So I don't know. Is that a helpful way of framing? I mean, I think that's one of the distinctive features of our time is just all this technology that allows us to live independently of each other. It's a lonely way to live.
Mm-hmm.
You wanted to know about the path, the alternative, I think, though.
We're all sitting over here just
admiring the problem.
No, I was going to give Jami a chance to share if she had anything. I'm just sitting here like, it's overwhelming, but it makes sense of the data we're seeing about how many people are lonely, how many people are on antidepressants. And no knock against medication or a moral judgment there, just the reality of where we're at, that is something people are reaching for because of a vacuum inside of themselves. I remember somebody told me to read this book a while ago called Till We Build Jerusalem. And it's about the architecture of cities. And they talked about some of these, the angles on a house, like a modern day house, how they're intentionally designed to represent a village. And there was actually a group of architects who got together and asked the question, how can we recreate the feeling and appearance of a village in a single family home? And so you have all these angles over the windows of a house. And it was designed to externally look in on the house to give you the sense of community, even though you were living by yourself.
Whoa.
And so the book just walks through all these architectural choices of the front-facing garage door with the garage door that opens and closes, and the bigger backyard than the bigger front yard.
Right.
And
exactly.
all these intentional moves to actually isolate you, but to give you the feeling that you're literally the king of your own castle. Like you have this area and just
the mayor of your own village.
Exactly.
Can I just drill down on one thing?
Please
add another dimension. You mentioned depression, which is a very, very widespread reality now. I mean, for the first time, the National Institutes of Health has said we need to screen all adults for depression. And that would have really been inconceivable to our grandparents who lived through very hard times, by the way. But this sense that this is now like a major public health risk. Every adult is at risk. Every primary care visit should include screening. That it wasn't needed, frankly, a generation or two ago. And there's many factors, and you mentioned some of them, but let me just add one. Perhaps the single most effective remedy for depression, clinically speaking, is not in fact a medication, though of course those can be very important. It's actually physical exercise. Intense physical exercise is a fantastic, proven way to reduce the effects of depression. But this is also connected to the automobile and to many other forms of technology. And this is why thinking of ourselves as heart, soul, mind, and strength matters so much, because we sort of think, well, I'm lonely. That's an emotional problem, right? And it is. It's actually also a body problem. It's a strength problem. It's that you have forgotten how to move through the world and to move through the world with other people, because you're in front of screens an awful lot, whether it's the TV or the phone or whatever. And then you're in your car where you're moving, but your body's not moving. This is the precondition for depression, immobility, and as well as loss of relationship. I have had the chance with maybe 5 times I've met someone from another part of the world, not from the Western world or the developed world, who had visited the United States. And I've gotten into the habit of asking them, what do you notice about the United States when you're here that we might not notice? Yeah. So 5 times I've asked, and 5 times I've gotten the same answer. This is like from people from, Colombia and Uganda and all over. It's always been the same answer. And they say, I notice how lonely it is here. Wow. That's their overwhelming impression of America, which is lonely. And then when you visit these places where most people, because of material circumstances, don't drive in cars, they walk. And I think about being in Nairobi, for example, and you just see people walking everywhere. And it's not an easy place to live, but you're surrounded by people. And you imagine being from that environment and coming to a typical American town or suburb, and you can drive for miles through all these houses looking like little villages. You never see a human being. You maybe see a few other cars. You never see a human being. And from the point of view of someone from most of sub-Saharan Africa, it'd be like, where are the people? What's happened to the people? It looks so lonely. I was like, oh my gosh, you're so right. That's like the most true thing you could say about my country. And I never would have seen it myself.
Wow. Well, that's all we have time for, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you find a better way to get through this lonely world we've created.
Hey neighbors, this is Jami. I am so glad we are on this journey of practicing biblical justice and compassion together. I want to invite you to help us bring Just Neighbors to as many people as possible by giving a rating and review of this show. Your encouragement and feedback is deeply meaningful to us. Not only does it help spread the word about the show, but your words provide necessary insight to us. We want to know if the show is bringing value to you. Will you take a minute to rate and review today's episode? I can't wait to hear from you.
It is helpful for, I think, people making sense of their reality. I think a lot of people are asking, why am I so lonely? Especially people of faith, because there's sometimes this Gnosticism that creeps in, and like, we have faith, we have the gospel, we should always be happy. And it's true, those things should inform, but you're a whole person. And if you're not moving your body regularly, that is part of the package. And I think, Andy, what you're doing is just resonating with so many people to say, you are not crazy. You're not alone.
Right.
There's nothing weird with you. You're not the problem. No. Society has been set up in these fundamental ways that make community, connection, and true intimacy very hard.
Yeah. Especially when I have college students who are like bearing the brunt of this for many reasons, and who has so much anxiety and loneliness and depression, I want to say to them, you are not a sick person in a healthy world. You are a normal person in an unhealthy world. Like you are having a normal, proper human response to the conditions you're living in. And that doesn't mean we don't have responsibility for ourselves to find our own way to health, and I believe that's possible, and also to be part of our society recovering health. But let's begin not with the premise, oh, something's wrong with you, why do you need medication? It's like, no, that's a proper embodied human response to the situation you're in. Yeah. So I mean, I think there's a couple things. One is I do think that actually having a pattern of disengagement from the technology is actually a big part of this. So I use all these devices that we've come up with. I probably use almost all of them, but not all the time and not every day. So the big principle in our house is 1 hour a day minimum and 1 day a week. And actually for us, 1 week a year. Pretty much anything with a switch, we turn it off. And by the way, Apple makes it very hard to figure out how to turn off your device these days. You have to hold 3 buttons at once, and you have to hold it for a while. Then very reluctantly, it's slide this. If you really want to turn it off, I mean, I don't know why you would, but if you want, slide this thing.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, so 1 hour a day for us, that's dinner time. 1 day a week for us, that's Sunday. And then 1 week a year, we're fortunate. We're able to take some vacation. And 1 week a year, we really just disengage from all the screens. I will tell you, dinner time, many nights, we turn off the lights, like electric lights have an off switch. Dinner by candlelight is to connect with other people, with your kids or with your spouse. I would actually say, as you get a little older and you turn the candles on, your spouse, it's like, oh, you have the glow of youth. It's, I highly recommend it.
That's amazing.
But something amazing happens when you turn out, lights and candles and have dinner that way. And so 1 hour a day, we have this, I think of it like a circuit breaker. In biblical terms, I think of Sabbath as a circuit breaker for idolatry. So idolatry is the unhealthy attachment to all these things, right? Yeah. And because on the Sabbath, we turn them all off, it interrupts our patterns of dependence. It also discloses our patterns of dependence. That is, you discover what you're kind of relying on to get you through the day, whatever it is. And then in that discovery, it also gives you an alternative, and you learn kind of a new way of being. And the beautiful thing is, you don't have to become Amish, though frankly, I understand why the Amish make the choices they make, and I think we dismiss them a little too much. Because they're my neighbors here in southeastern Pennsylvania, just 2 counties away is the largest collection of Amish in the United States. And I admire the way they live in a lot of ways. But I think the rest of us don't necessarily have to turn it off forever. But when you just turn it off for an hour, when you're together, and then you turn it off for a day, and then if you have the freedom, and I think it's an unjust world that wouldn't give us the freedom or doesn't give us the freedom to turn it off for a week, you just you got to rediscover what it's like to be human. So that would be one thing. And then when the stuff is on, you might say, when it is, when we are using it in one way or another, I actually try to go back to this heart, soul, mind, strength template and say, how can I use this, whatever device or system I'm using, basically in a more heart, soul, mind, strength engaged way, maybe than it was designed for. So if you and I were to have a one-on-one conversation these days by telecom, rather than doing it on Zoom, I usually suggest we do it by phone, and then I get outside and go for a walk while we talk, if the weather's permits. Yeah. And I've found I have great conversations with people, and better conversations, even by phone, when I'm walking than when I'm sitting. Let alone if you have the chance to actually meet someone in person, like go for a walk. It's amazing. I mean, this is what Jesus did,
Yeah. Sure did.
So, and then, but you can do it with the other elements too. Like, how can I use this drive? I think a lot of people do think about this, to like increase my emotional kind of availability, or to challenge my mind. And so you can obviously listen to a podcast. I think the trick is there's a way to do that that's just like entertainment and distraction from how boring driving is. But you just with a click of a button, you could choose something more emotionally challenging in a way, like something deeper than just entertainment. And same thing with like for your mind, you can either just sort of listen to candy, or you can listen to steak or, or your plant-based alternative to that. And it's all within our grasp to decide, like, I'm going to use this in a way that extends my heart, my soul, my mind, and my strength. So good. Yeah, so it's like practicing that, and redesigning our lives to be more attuned to that, rather than just taking the default settings, which tend not to be very developmental of our heart, soul, mind, and strength.
I have some practical examples of this that have really been inspired, Andy, by Praxis. So for those who are listening, I am right now, as we record, in the nonprofit accelerator program. And so that's how I've got to know Andy. And my goodness, it's been quite an amazing thing. But you guys introduced us to the rule of life for entrepreneurs. Yep. And Sabbath was one of the things that we all need, right? Especially driven entrepreneurial people as us. Yep. And so I really took that to heart. I wanted to, fortunately, I have a wonderful husband who helps me slow down, because I wanted to come home and say, hey, children, guess what? Everything's changing like tomorrow.
Yes, right.
He's like, why don't we think about this? Let's make a plan, and then we can introduce it to the rest of the people in our home. But anyways, we did finally start a Sabbath practice with our whole family that from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m, everybody's phone is put away.
Wow.
And it's really good. And I think too, there's a couple things that have been so interesting. One, well, we kind of started this at the same time too, but in the mornings before church, Clint takes the boys and I take the girls. He takes the boys to a diner and they do like a Bible study. The girls, we prefer a coffee shop. So we
civilized.
We said no. Highbrow. We went to the diner twice and decided that wasn't for us. So
that's amazing.
Anyways,
that's awesome.
We go to the coffee shop and we ask each other 3 questions. What are you reading in God's word? What are you learning? And how can I pray for you? And then before we hit church, I will pray for one, my daughter will pray for the next daughter will pray for me. We'll go in a circle. And it has been just one of the most beautiful practices. And when I have to, like, if I'm on the worship team at church, if I have to go early, they will still do it together. They'll still go through those questions, which I'm like, I love this. But by 7:30 at night, I mean, the kids were still getting used to it because they're like, oh, it's Sabbath again.
Oh, yeah.
Or like 7:30, is it 8 yet? And at 8, everyone like grabs their phones. So, we're still learning, but it's a detox, right?
Wow,
because you're like,
indeed.
I'm just going to sit around and talk, or I see kids pick up a guitar, or some of the kids go out and shoot baskets, or it's stuff that we all used to do.
Yes.
But when you have a phone right there, it's just too easy to pick that up and be all isolated. Yeah. It's been a really good thing.
Amazing. I do think the invitation of Sabbath, this sort of both the 1 day a week idea and the general principle of having these rhythms, is to find, like, what are the things that can fill that? It's not just to empty, it's to make room, right?
Yes.
And over time, your family will, more and more discover, these are the things we love to do. And this is what happened for us too. And and you just end up with much deeper connection. I think another thing I want to mention here is that Sabbath is like in my experience, the great unappreciated pathway to justice. I mean, because you all are like focusing on how do we become people who do justice in the world. It's very interesting that the Sabbath command is given 2 times in the Old Testament. And I think it's in Exodus. The reason given for it is because God himself, in creating the world, rested on the 7th day. And to me, this is a sign that Sabbath is a pathway to imitating God's creative activity, right? So Sabbath actually replenishes what we need to create in the world in the image of God. I'm pretty sure it's in Deuteronomy, the other time, it gives a different reason. It says, remember the Sabbath, keep it. And of course, it always says, not just you, but everyone in your household, people who serve you. It's this very extensive list of everyone in the community gets a day. And it says, because you were once slaves in Egypt, but the Lord your God brought you out with a mighty hand and outstretched arm. And so instead of talking about God's creative action, it talks about God's liberating action and his deliverance from bondage. And what is the basic condition of being a slave? It's you don't have the freedom to decide when you work or not. And you are really working all the time. You're never anything but your labor when you're a slave. You're reduced to your labor productivity. Which, by the way, we don't have slavery in our economy, we don't think, but how many people feel reduced to their labor and are effectively reduced to it by our economy even. And Sabbath is the principle of liberation from that says you cannot be reduced to what you produce. And there is freedom for you to be a full human being, whatever your place in society. So it kind of activates a justice imagination, and a world without Sabbath is always an unjust world, just by definition and necessarily.
And you kind of pause activities like purchasing and maybe some other things that may be contributing to some of those unjust practices. And that also helps. I think you might be referencing Walter Brueggemann's book, Sabbath is Resistance.
For sure.
He touches on some of this, that if you're listening to this and you're interested in Sabbath, that book is a must read.
Yeah, that's incredible.
And short, it's easy to digest. It's so deep and rich. And that is beautiful. I love that we've spent so much time talking about how do we become the people who are able to fully love in terms of these spiritual practices and their implications. I wonder, Andy, if you could comment on how we take that self who's able to fully love and then go engage justice and compassion for the marginalized in our society. We've got a beautiful segue there with Sabbath as one of those means. But for people who want to practice biblical justice and compassion, how would we take ourselves that are working on being able to fully love and then kind of engage people who are hurting and really need to encounter the love of God?
Well, the only way is proximity. It's being close enough in space and time to feel what it's like to be a human being in maybe sometimes very different circumstances from our own, and taking the time to really know that person without rushing to fix what we might imagine is wrong.
That's so
partly
hard.
Because
that's so hard to do. But you're totally right. But just confessing here. Oh man.
Extremely. And this is another thing, by the way, that technology has taught us is that, technology actually has taught us that the world is full of problems that have solutions. And that's true in like mechanical domains or engineering domains. It's not necessarily true in human lives. There's a lot in the human world of individuals and families and societies it is not a problem and it doesn't have a solution. That doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean it's working the way it should. It just doesn't, it's not a problem like a math problem or how much load can a bridge carry? It's not that kind of thing. And so even by saying even by using the problem language, you're implying you're going to be able to solve it, or an expert can solve it. But the deepest things in human life they're not solvable, which means they're actually not problems. I don't mean they're good. They're just not the right word. So modernity has taught us to be very impatient, to kind of re-describe the world in terms of problems we can solve, because that would make us feel good about ourselves and our science and our engineering. And there's this whole thing called social science, right, that was invented to say we can apply all the same principles we apply to like how to build a bridge to how to build a city, for example, like you were alluding to, Ryan, how to build a nation. And it totally does not work. And in fact, it produces a great deal of injustice. That whole way of thinking produces injustice. So what's the opposite of it? It's patient presence. It's patiently being present to someone or a community that is hurting, potentially, and all communities in different ways are hurting, and attending to what the pain is, what the shame is, what the guilt is, what the fear is, because those are kind of the four things that go wrong in our stories. And rather than quickly fixing it, first just being present to it, and then prayerfully, perhaps discerning what the path is, in it and through it. And that path is rarely something I do for someone else. It's more likely that my role in the life of someone else, especially who's experienced injustice, because the essence of injustice is others taking control of someone's life in a way that robs them of authority. So injustice is the result of some people trying to control other people, I think. And so the way out of that is not going to be me, a nice person controlling them instead of the bad people who have controlled them. It's going to be they themselves, the person who has been on the receiving end of that system of injustice, discovering and acting in the authority they're given as a son or daughter of God to act on behalf of the good for themselves and people they love. And my role in that is likely to be primarily present and a friend and a companion in it rather than the agent of it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And it's not that I can't be helpful or can't even provide sometimes real insight that makes a difference in them being able to take that authority, but it's always theirs to do. And boy, that takes patience, which then in turn takes maturity. and it also actually takes hope. It takes hope is not self-reliant, and it's not hope in a solution. It's hope in God. Like when I'm with this person or this community that's bearing this burden, hoping, not in the weak sense of the word, like, well, I don't know, but I hope so. But no, I place my hope that God is at work in this situation, and I'm just here with them to discover it. That would be the pattern, at least. And it works out in a lot of different ways in a lot of different settings.
I think it takes a lot of our understanding of our own needs too. Like a humility, an understanding of my own dependence on God, right? Like we can stand and be with people, but if we're being with people still with the mindset of we're better than them or we've got it figured out, that's not going to be very helpful
That's right.
And so like making sure what we can do, I think too, is be dependent on God, recognize our need, and then from his love and his something I've restarted. When my kids were little, I would always pray with them before they went to school. Everyone went to school at the same time pretty much. And I'd always tell them to look out for the underdog and be a leader. And they'd run out to the bus and off they'd go. And over the years, as they gotten older, I kind of got out of that habit until we were doing a book, Habits of the Household, at church in a morning seminar. And so I restarted these prayers, and now I'm doing the laying on of hands on them. I'm laying my hands on them and making them lay hands on each other, which they hate.
They hate it.
But I have started this prayer, and now it's in 3 sections because 2 kids leave, and then a few minutes later, 2 other. Anyways, but I'm reminding them and myself really, but I say, Dear Lord, you say in your word that you've knit me together and knit us together in our mother's womb. We praise you because we are fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works. Lord, we understand that this means and I'll name my child, Dade or Layla or Bobby or whomever, Dade is perfectly equipped to live the life and do the work that you have created and called him to do. Help him to feel your love today and share your love with others, especially the underdog. And then I tell them, you are sent.
Wow.
So we're trying to just like start that day. So I'm doing that pretty much 3 times every day. So, and I'm guessing God is probably speaking the same thing to me as I share it with them.
And that is all we need. I mean, it is really interesting. I mean, Jesus is our pattern, and he brought flourishing. I mean, man, you want to talk about flourishing? Jesus brought it everywhere he went. And he announces his ministry in Luke 4 as bringing justice. Like that is that is what he's here for. But he does not do it through a program. There's not even a template like, oh, he did this thing over and over. Like, no, he feeds 5,000 people one place and 4,000 another. But he doesn't like go around and do a feeding program. Yeah. He heals people, but he doesn't heal them all the same way. Sometimes he talks to them, sometimes he touches them, sometimes it just happens almost by someone coming up behind him without him knowing. Like there's no pattern except that he's totally present with whatever situation he's in, whether it's a crowd or an individual. And with no other resource. He doesn't have a degree in medicine. He doesn't have has no power except the power of being a person who is totally loving God with all his heart, soul, mind, and strength and loving his neighbor. It's crazy. Like that's all there is. And he didn't even use, the 2 most basic technologies are money and writing. They're the original technologies. Jesus uses neither one. He never writes anything down. He never himself spends money. There's a little bit of money that his disciples hold on to, I guess. Judas apparently holds on to it. But it's clearly not, Jesus is not like, I'm going to spend my way into solving social problems. Like that's, I'm a philanthropist. Like, no, that's not his means at all. His means is being a person. And that's our invitation. And of course, the beautiful thing about this is it means it doesn't matter how much money you have, how much access to technology you do or do not have. The only thing you need is the ability to pursue Jesus, become remade in his image, and then be present to other people. And anyone can do that.
Wow. I can't think of a better way to end our time together. Andy, this has been so helpful. I feel like I have like 12 things to deeply think about and process in my own life. If people are being ministered to by your thoughts, how can they continue to kind of follow you? I mean, I would commend your book, Strong in the Weak, as it deals with a lot of what we've talked about today. How else can people kind of tag along and follow your journey?
I mean, the books are the best because they get the most patient attention. I'm barely on social media. I'm not even going to mention it. But I will say, Jami mentioned, if you're looking for some suggestions toward a practical way, the Praxis rule of life, if you Google that phrase, Praxis, Praxis, that we designed for entrepreneurs, but a lot in it probably applies to many people. And it at least gives you a starting point of thinking about what could I build into my life to become more available to God. And we've found these 6 practices actually make a pretty big difference. So I would recommend that.
Well, Andy, can you pray for us and everyone who's listening that we would develop the ability to fully love for the sake of others?
Thank you so much, God, for, first of all, just three of us to encounter one another in conversation in your presence. Three very different stories. I just think about just three very different ways of experiencing school as the one who it came easy to, the one it came incredibly hard to, the one who kind of was in the middle. And it just doesn't matter to you that was where we started because of the amazing things you've done in all of our lives to set us free from all that we carried early in our lives, to call us toward yourself, which means toward one another, toward encounter with one another, toward being able to benefit from and just build up one another. And we include then in this circle all the friends and neighbors who are listening, each with their own story. And thank you for what you've already, no one has listened this far in this podcast without your grace having been at work a lot in their lives to make them the kind of person who would seek this out. And so thank you, God, for the grace you've already poured into our lives that has set us free from the things that held us captive in so many ways. And God, would you equip us, all of us, to become neighbors to others who many of whom probably have not yet felt seen or loved in the way that we are so blessed to have felt seen and loved, but from whom we will learn something about what it is to be seen and loved, even as we offer them what you've offered to us. And as we do that, God, would your great commandment be more real in the world? Would the world just say, oh my goodness, there are people who love with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength. And there are people who love their neighbors as themselves. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
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 Just Neighbors is a resource of the Forgotten Initiative, a Christ-centered nonprofit ministry that exists to help churches support foster care agencies across America. TFI is funded by listeners like you and other faithful ministry partners who have received value from our work and want to help us expand our efforts across the nation. We are grateful for the opportunity to serve you and your church with resources that bring understanding for the people of foster care and provide you with gospel-centered encouragement to depend on Jesus as you serve. I invite you to join us today with a gift of any amount at theforgotteninitiative.org/give. Let's do this together.